I know I've certainly enjoyed the content today so far. Have you all been enjoying the sessions and hearing the pitches? Yes, hands raised. Okay, are we feeling a little shy? I hope we warm up throughout this session. So it's fantastic to be here in Cairo. This is my first time in Egypt, actually. And it's even more of a pleasure to be in the company of such incredible women who are shifting the ecosystem, both here in Egypt and also more broadly across the African ecosystem. And I want to first, though, start with your introduction. So if you could each spend some time talking about what it is you do and just introducing yourself to the audience, about 1 minute apiece, that would be great.
Should I start?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mariam Kamel. I'm a banker turned founder turned angel investor. I manage AUC Angels, which is an alumni-based angel investor network. I'm also an emerging fund manager for an early stage VC investing across the continent. And for today's topic, relevant to today's topic as well, I'm on the board of Tia Angels, which is a female angel investor network with a gender lens investment thesis. And I have a personal portfolio across the continent as well, mainly Egypt, Nigeria, East Africa, and the Francophone bloc.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ashim Egonjobi. I am visiting Cairo, not for the first time. It's funny, I was telling somebody outside the first time I was in Cairo was 20 years ago, so I feel like I'm returning over and over. I am the managing partner at Octera Capital. We're an early stage venture capital fund headquartered in Lagos, Nigeria, investing in tech-enabled solutions across the continent. We do have a gender lens, and about 40% of our portfolio in value is invested in female-led startups. So really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Amara Anan. I will only start with my most recent role so that you continue to think that I'm younger than I really am. So I'm a partner of 500 Global. Most recently, I just joined 6 months ago. We're an early stage venture capital fund investing across the world, and specifically in the MENA region. We've been investing since 2012. And we have over 95 companies invested in Africa. Before joining 500, I attempted and failed at raising a gender lens fund. So I felt very passionately about the opportunity for diversifying the landscape of the investment landscape in Africa, and particularly in my market here in Egypt. But I'm really glad with 500 that the leadership is predominantly women, and similarly 40% of our portfolio is women. So it's something where I felt huge value alignment.
Hey, last woman. I'm Nadia Tawil. I have around 15 years of experience in private equity, and I recently joined Africa Invest. Africa Invest invests across Africa. And we have a VC fund that we've just raised for in July 2022. The interesting thing about our firm is we are gender focused, and 44% of our employees are women, and therefore this kind of falls through into all of our portfolio companies as well.
Thank you. So I want to make this very conversational. We started the discussion even outside, beginning to talk a little bit about some of the things that we see both here in the African ecosystem, but also more globally. And some of the challenges really are the same even across geographies. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on challenges, but I think that if there is someone in the room who hasn't really been a part of this kind of conversation, it's helpful to just outline a bit of what is it that you see that could shift. I know the title of the panel is Building a More Resilient Pipeline, but really we're talking about strengthening the role of women in the startup ecosystem. Whether that ecosystem is defined by a single country or the broader continental market or globally. So I'd like to start with you, Ashim, and really get your perspective on some of the challenges that you've seen for women in VC. And let's talk about both sides, from the perspective of more women entering as investors into VC, but also what are the challenges that you see founders facing as someone who is writing checks at a fund?
Yeah, sure. I think everybody has probably seen maybe not everybody, it's probably just my assumption, but a lot of us have seen the numbers with regards to where funding sits, not just in Africa, but worldwide. So we talk about less than 2% of funding going to female-led startups. And I think it was like 16, 17, 18% of funding going to diverse founder teams. It's just simply not enough. And oftentimes the question is, well, why is that? Is that because we don't have sufficient pipeline? Or is that in fact for other reasons? And I think one of the other stats that we don't talk about enough is, for instance, that across the world, typically if we look at those global numbers, about 10% of VC funds are headed by women or led by women. So if you think about those numbers, then probably it starts making a little bit more sense. When the focus and the intentionality isn't there with regards to where funds are to be allocated, building a diverse portfolio, having certain metrics that you're working towards, whether those are fund or portfolio or investor-led metrics, then it gets very difficult because then we probably are also not measuring. And then at the end of the year, somebody writes a report and we're all shocked. So I think some of the challenges that I certainly see are not necessarily with regards to do we have a pipeline? I believe we do. I think the challenges really center around intentionality with regards to building portfolios that are in fact diverse, ensuring that founders as well as female investors have opportunities to sit in spaces of equity. And what I mean with that is to say that everybody is awarded with the same opportunities, fully understanding that not everybody has the same baseline to start with, right? So we may have seen this picture where three people stand over a fence and are trying to look over the fence into what's happening out there. And everybody's given the same height of box, okay? Now, the reality in the world is that we're not all the same height. So you've got somebody who's super short, you've got a really tall person, and then you've got like a medium height person. So the really short person, even though he has a box, is still not able to view over the fence. The really tall person now has super view onto the field. And the medium person, can just about see over. So equity really talks around saying we've got to make sure that in order to provide everybody the opportunity to in fact look over the fence, we have to make sure that the box that is allocated is in fact the right height for everybody.
Yeah, I think I pick up on two things from that, intentionality and then also increasing equity. If we are going to shift the numbers in terms of the VC capital that's actually flowing to women-led startups or increase the number of women GPs, you need both. I want to kind of come to Miriam and see if your experiences kind of echo what Ashim was discussing, what your perspective is. Is it intentionality and equity, or how would you what would you add to the conversation?
Yeah, so I missed much of the conversation outside, but the short part of it that I did join, I was sharing kind of my experience with regards to, we were talking about pipeline, and I was saying, if you think, the pipeline, we actually have more female founders coming in as a percentage of our pipeline than we do female angel investors. And the reason I'll just talk about this is I have that perspective and I have the data and the numbers on that. And then B, it is quite common. So when we're talking about GPs, female GPs, GPs will come from, several sources. So some will be founders, operators, others will come with an investment background, and some will be angel investors evolving into fund managers. And so on the angel front, it's just, so I'll tell you, even with regards to the startups that have pitched to our network, we have about, let's say, 20 to 30% of total startups that pitch, though of those, the conversion into actually getting fundraising is quite high. But we will have less than 5% of our network are females. So you actually have a lot less female investors than you do female founders. And so when we sit and we think about that, you were talking earlier about challenges. Of course, there are structural challenges, right, around, earnings and and having disposable income and what women generally prioritize with regards to savings, kind of their position on investing in high risk capital. So there's a lot of that can be discussed, but not necessarily. Maybe it's a bit more of a long-term game. But then also, so most of the women that we have as angel investors are really ones that are very unique, kind of in their desire and interest to play this game, right? So I think there definitely has to be intentionality around encouraging that. You do, as an angel investor, let's say, even as a GP, you do walk into a room where there are fewer people looking like you than you would anticipate. It's the same, by the way, I mean, I'm sure, Nancy, you've experienced that. It's the same in private equity. It's the same in banking, across finance. But so that's definitely something that we see. We're definitely also seeing it improve as there are, we're seeing more females graduating from, STEM-oriented degrees going into, just the tech space in general, or as operators. A lot of them, the prediction, of course, is that then feeds into some of these successful founders then spill over into investors later on. So, I mean, the progress is there and it's, evident, but we are starting from quite a low base, just to kind of echo what Ashim was saying.
Yeah, it feels like we're already turning towards solutions a bit, right? The challenges are clear, they're easily kind of defined, as Ashim did. Amal, I'm curious to kind of bring you into the conversation, and as we begin to think about solutions and what kinds of things you're already seeing in the ecosystem, whether it's from a programs perspective or other things that are helping to increase the number of women who are starting startups, getting funded, and also increase the number of women who are becoming GPs. I would love your perspective on some of the solutions that you see that work. Yeah.
I like to very much think of the progress that's been made so far and to acknowledge that. Obviously, you look at today, specifically in Egypt and across Africa, I think if you went to Africa 15 years ago, you wouldn't have been meeting that many women GPs, both in private equity and even more so in venture. And so that progress is very visual, and that's something that actually kind of gives me a lot of hope. At the same time, it's also one of the things that are across the board is it's a very tough market, right? Today, just the global challenges are putting a setback on every front, gender diversity being one of them. So in much tougher times, even the repercussions on diversity are more felt. So even some of that progress is being eroded because, as we think of how much harder it's becoming for startups to fundraise and investors being pickier and pickier, they go with safer solutions, what they perceive as safe. And unfortunately, safe does not necessarily share the same looks as diversity. So some of that has been, hard hit this year and last year. And I think this is where, to Ashim's point around metrics, it's very important to be measuring that, to see even when there are setbacks happening, how they're going on across the entire market and portfolios. On that, what I really loved Ashim's description of the fence and the height, and it's actually a visual that I think about often. And one of the things that I recently saw that I loved is a new version of that picture where they changed the shape of the fence. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where solutions lie. Why do you accept the fence being that height, right? Does the market need to look that way? Do we really think the way as GPs, the sourcing mechanisms, the diligence mechanisms, and how investment and decision-making processes are being made are really leading us to the best returns, and how we are missing out on a lot of great opportunities because of how we got anchored into thinking that this is best in class, and re-questioning that and re-questioning how our markets should actually look. I love a more colorful, more diverse market, right? That's a better world that I want to live in. And when someone at the beginning they said, I want my 12-year-old sister to have better opportunities, to live in a different world than we are in today. I think this is where it's where solutions can come. When you think of how you would want, what kind of world you want to live in 30 years, and how you're doing business today, is that really going to create that colorful, sustainable, beautiful world, safer, from my opinion, world to live in. And in that world, the fence is pretty much imaginary. It's just a given construct that you can really play around. Like, can't you just put a hole in the fence so that the shorter person can see you on the other side? Because why can't they see? And I think this is where there's a lot of opportunity to rethink our investment processes and mechanisms and our hiring and how we create opportunities. I mean, I think sometimes, honestly, when we're hiring, I don't really care if they have university degrees, right? I give case studies based on, can you do the job? and the more, and increasingly as we think of who are the best people to perform these jobs and and have the skill set and have, you know, the culture and the values to bring the best out of the market and to really drive those returns and drive those changes, it makes us revisit a lot of things and a lot of things that we thought are a given. Back in the day, to be a finance professional, you had to study for a CFA, and, you know, that was one of the checks. Whenever I graduating person and all of the Gen Z analysts that are coming to market and be like, what do you think of the CFA? I'm like, that's a waste of time. Like, do not do it. I'd rather you actually work on an investment memo and look at a deal and, like, you know, let's structure a deal together. And probably, you know, that's not even helpful for them anymore because ChatGPT will do that, just like it's doing their slides. But the hope is, how do we change? Because the world is changing, and I think the market is still holding on to constructs that are not serving us anymore.
Yeah, I think that piece about questioning assumptions, like building on the point about intentionality, but it is, I mean, there's data that indicates that diverse founder teams perform better, right? Mm-hmm. So as an investor, if you're seeking a higher return, then it makes just all the sense in the world, right, to ensure that teams are diverse. Mm-hmm. But, you know, if this fence example that we're kind of extending through the conversation, as I come to you, Nadia, like I start to think about, like, well, who built the fence in the first place, or like who's, and so then you start to think about institutions and the role of institutional investors, for example, the role of LPs. Nadia, I'd love to get your perspective from a solutions lens. What is it that LPs could be doing differently to actually shift the ecosystem and strengthen the pipeline?
So I think in recent years, there's been a lot more focus on ESG requirements, on having an impact on your investments and the type of companies you look at and who you invest with. I think we just need to change it from being a checklist to something which has an impact. Because today, as an LP, if you're conscious, especially if you're a DFI, you're saying, you know, I want to have a positive impact and all my investments need to, you know, do good in the world. You have this list. Do they have women in the company? Check. Is there a women in management? Check. Are they, you know, do they have a positive global impact? Yes. However, it ends up being a bit of like paper pushing in the sense that you're just saying, yes, 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 we have these things, but we're not measuring the actual impact of these things. And I think very few LPs actually come back, you know, a year later and say, well, what progress have you made in the past year? You know, you had 5 women before, today you have 10. Do you just have women because we said that you need to have women, or are they in active roles and contributing to the company? What, you know, growth initiatives are you doing? Are there development plans? And I think this is where it ends up being more of having an impactful change in your investment through your portfolio companies versus just saying, you know, well, we have a list, we do care about these things, and it's just a concept and it remains something like intangible in reality.
Yeah, thank you for that point. I think that's so critical. I was sharing that Amazon launched a fund of funds last year. We have Amazon Catalytic Capital, and the goal of the fund is to get capital in the hands of more underrepresented founders, but we do that by finding GPs who we believe have an intentional focus on that. But one of the things I was surprised to hear is that many corporate LPs don't ask the same types of questions that are asked by more like FDIs, essentially. So that's certainly something I'm going to take back. I selfishly was asking a little bit about that because I think it's helpful to what we're building.
I feel like if you're thinking about it from a corporate perspective, a lot of things have been forced to corporates. Like at the end of the day, you want to do business in the easiest way to you. You want to make the most money. So you're not like, you know, people when they say we've stopped investing in particular sectors. Well, if you're running your own business and it's making you a lot of money, then you're going to continue investing in the sector. What's going to drive the change is when people are like, well, no, we can't work with you if you invest in these sectors, or no, we can't work with you if you know, don't have an accurate representation of society in your company. Mm-hmm. So I think external factors are ultimately what drives the changes in corporates.
Yeah, no, absolutely, external and internal.
Mm-hmm. Drivers of change.
Yeah. So, you know, I see in the audience a founder I spent a lot of time talking to earlier today, and we talked some about the ecosystem here and some of the shifts that she'd like to see. And as I think about putting myself in her shoes, having been a former founder, often you're trying to get some tactical, strategic pieces that you can take with you, not just kind of the high-level points. And we've talked some about the different stakeholders within the ecosystem. But turning to the founder in particular, I'd like each of you to talk about some of the tips that you'd give to a founder. Let's say it's seed stage founder, right, early on. What are the strategies that you've seen founders deploy to successfully raise capital that you would kind of advise any founder on? And I'm specifically thinking about Aya, who's in the audience, who's building Word, and we had some time to talk about it. So starting with you, Miriam, and going down the panel.
Sure. What I've seen work really well here across the continent and very much so in MENA, so in GCC markets, is to really tap into your network. And if we were kind of bringing in the gender component here, really leaning into and not shying away from calling people you know, people you've worked with before, letting them know what you're doing, and asking them to help with introductions and referrals. This is strong, it's huge, and we see the male founders doing that, a lot more, whereas, women will focus more on their ability and what they're planning and not necessarily do that as much, making a major generalization here, but it's just purely like anecdotally from what I've seen. So definitely that's a big one, I think, tapping into that. Not taking no for an answer, because sometimes that's just a first no, right? But also like knowing when to stop, right? I mean, it's this really kind of delicate balance between making sure that you're iterative and not necessarily taking the first no for an answer, but then at the same time making sure that you're being smart with your time, right? You don't want to waste your time on people who you're not going to get somewhere with. So those are the kind of two things, just like really chipping away slowly until you get at it.
I think I would summarize it with two words. One, educate, and the other one, do your homework. Okay, it's more than two words, but when I say educate, what do I mean? You've got to make sure that you have a growth mindset and that you continue to strive to become better every day. Nobody knows it all, and that's perfectly fine. So work with people who can help identify your weak spots. How do you pitch better? If you already pitch perfectly, great, go focus on something else. Like your network, maybe. How do I enhance my network? How do I find people who can be a sponsor to me in my, path as a founder, especially as a founder who's raising capital? How can I ensure that I attract the best talent? Where do I need to be? What type of networks make sense for me to be part of, for instance? And there goes into the doing your homework. So make sure that you understand the type of investor that may be the right investor to speak to. Speak to investors who may see the world similar to how you see the world, where you have a shared value set. And if you do some homework on their website, ask people, you can learn a lot just by how, people position themselves and what they say, but also what people say about them. But also, what else do you need to do to your homework? You got to make sure that when you attend conferences, for instance, you have a short list and a long list of people you want to talk to. You have a way of finding how you're going to talk to those people. You've identified warm leads. If you can't find the warm leads, hey, it's okay to say, hi, Amal, I'm Ash, and, do you have a minute to speak? And you don't need to pitch to them directly, right? Sometimes it's okay to just build a relationship, and then you can always follow up on that later. But it's really important that those two things go together, and that you continue chipping away at it, and that you continue educating yourself, that you continue to find new strategies, and find people that can partner with you on those new strategies, that you do your homework, that you leverage on every single opportunity. If you don't have the cash to attend a conference, go find a grant that's going to get you there. Go find someone who's going to sponsor you, get a speaking opportunity. Do whatever you can to get that visibility.
Great. Amal, same question.
I think for something that I repeatedly do say to founders is taking the step back and in doing your homework, and it's something most underinvest in, is know yourself very well and know what you need. And by that I mean, similar to the point raised around what am I good at, what I'm not good at, and in the what I'm good at, really claim it, right? Like some have extreme technical industry expertise, and you can really claim, in healthcare, like I've done X, Y, and Z, like I know my stuff, but they really suck at fundraising, which is fine, right? So you get someone on board, like it helps you understand what you're solving for. What am I looking for in a partner? When I'm talking to investors, as you know yourself very well, how much do I really need to raise? Why do I need to raise it? What is going to be a burn rate? Because these are the people that you need to hire. Now this is how much I can actually take on myself. I don't want to burn out either, so I'm going to have to hire some support juniors. Like the more you know yourself and can really claim what you're good at and have a acceptance of what you suck at, the more you can be clearer in your asks and be more thoughtful about how you're building your company, your business, and more at peace with yourself. And specifically to female founders, I think this is something where an area that can really help them a lot, because when there are a lot of female founders that I highly respect because of their technical and industry expertise, and yes, there is more of a struggle when it comes to fundraising. There's a lot that we can spend a whole other session on when it comes to just changing mindsets and behaviors and what questions investors ask, and how the female founders are not as ambitious, and how they present themselves, and how they're not they don't claim what they're good at and are not as ambitious with the ask when it comes to fundraising. But I actually know some female founders that are extremely good at relationship management and managing. One of them is right there, Nihal Helmi from Flend. Like she's very experienced in managing very complex stakeholders, and she's very good at relationship management with investors, but also within the industry and financial services that she is in. And that's something that helps a lot with when you have co-founders that are not as actually. By the way, men are much more volatile and can ruin relationships, and they need a lot of women to manage that. So knowing yourself and being able to claim what you're good at and solving for the rest, I think is the first step. It makes the whole road much clearer for us as investors to also understand where we can help you, if this is a fit for us or not.
Absolutely. Nadia, can you round out this question?
So obviously I tend to agree with what everyone has said, and I think everything is valid. At the end of the day, fundraising is a very, very difficult process. And it doesn't matter if you're a male, a female. If you've raised 10 funds, it doesn't mean that the 11th is going to be easy, and the first one will be just as hard. So definitely, let's say when we're talking about education and doing your homework and all of that, you need to be cognizant that regardless, fundraising is difficult. So one of the things is when you're approaching potential partners, like the ladies said, you need to do your research on them. Why do you want this partner? Have they invested in similar things before? Like, there's no point in going to someone that only invests in tech when I'm going to something completely different. I'm going to get a rejection. Yeah. But it's just doing your homework, knowing who you're talking to, what are their portfolio companies, what do they look for? And then why do you need these people? Because sometimes when you fundraise, it's a partnership. You're stuck with those investors for a number of years. If you don't have a good relationship, therefore relationship management is very important. It's not going to be a fun time. It's also learning to not take it personally. If I've done my homework and I've done everything I could do, and I get the rejection, it's not a closed door forever. It could be a connection that's going to come to use a few years down the line and whatnot. Second of all, no one's perfect. Everyone has a weakness, and if you're not feeling challenged ever in your life, then you're not putting yourself out there. So I think sometimes we magnify, how hard the process is, or you feel like, you're the one struggling and no one else around you is. But once you realize that, you're trying to better yourself and you're doing your homework and you're attending the right conferences, talking to the right people, and all of that, I think everything comes together eventually.
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes, and as we close out, one of the things that I believe is that if you want to shift the world, you have to be able to imagine it, right? And I know that I'm looking at 4 visionary women on this panel. So what I'm hoping we can do in about a minute or less is think about 20 years from now, what you hope the African ecosystem, really the global ecosystem, looks like for women VCs, women in VC, and for women founders, and describe, if there's anything that you haven't already said, how you think we get there. And Ashim, you're nodding, so I'll come to you first.
It was more like thinking.
Yeah,
like,
okay. A thoughtful nod. Yes.
I would hope that in 20 years, or certainly less, when we have a panel that talks about scaling a more resilient women in tech pipeline in Africa, or anything else really that has to do with the VC ecosystem and women in it, that we have a whole panel of men up here talking exactly about the things that we're talking about. Because it is my belief, it truly is, that without male allies in this conversation, and I'm really happy to see so many men in the room, because what often happens is that the panel is female and the audience is as well, but we already know the issues, we know the solutions, so why are we talking to each other, right? So I'm really glad to see so many men in the panel that are actually leaning in and interested in this conversation, and I would really hope that we have more intentionality around, at least from where I sit on the investor side, with regards to building portfolios that are diverse, investing in underrepresented founders, be that women or other diverse founders, and really ensuring that we check our own biases. So as we leave this room today, it would be great if everybody sort of checks their own biases, because there's nobody without them. But if we don't continuously check our biases, we're just not going to get to the place where we can build this diversity. So 20 years or less, that's my vision.
Thank you. Miriam?
So I think the obvious answer is, 20 years' time. There's obviously, greater representation, but the reality is that if you speak to anybody who's 20 years younger than you, they're already growing up in a very different world, and it's really in their mind. There are certain things that I think we grew up with that we had to navigate, that in their minds, trust me, because I do, I speak with younger people, in the ecosystem, and I'm raising, upcoming generations. They are really somewhere else, and sometimes you try and warn them about the way things are in the world, and they're oblivious to what you're talking about, and you feel like, am I doing more damage in giving you advice on managing the kind of world I grew up in? Never mind, I'm not even going there. And so first of all, it's not, we always knew, it's not a matter of if, it was really a function of when. And so I think one thing is that, in preparing for a future you can't even fathom, it already exists in their minds, and what they see, what they've normalized, and where they have set clear boundaries. And once again, some of the things, so that's why ideally in 20 years, we're not even having this panel. It's not about like guys also being on this panel. This isn't even a topic, right? I mean, to a certain extent, right? I don't know if that's 20, 40 years, but I'm just saying it's really a different reality in their minds.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. It's like for the generation just behind us, they're entering the conversation like, of course there's an expectation of equity. Like,
but that is because of the intentional work done from as far back as the 1960s, the 1970s, by a lot of male and female feminists and people who've really put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that takes us back to what Amal was mentioning earlier, that we have to acknowledge progress.
Yeah.
So certainly there was work that was done that set the table for where we are here, the fact that this panel is happening today. But again, kind of looking forward, would love your quick answer on...
Kind of simple. I hope in 20 years there is no fence, we're all jumping in the field. But my real hope is that in 20 years, women are really the wealth creators on the continent and sharing that success and wealth. And I think that's definitely a world where I want to be.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I honestly think we're already working towards that. And like you said, the younger generation is not even aware that there's an issue. So if you just put the right metrics and they'll move a few pieces now, then by the time they're ready to be leaders and stuff, they won't even know that it was an issue 20 years ago.
Absolutely. So if you're an LP or a GP in the room, question your assumptions, be intentional. If you're a founder, do your homework. Those are the pieces that I'm taking away from this conversation. Thank you each for making time to be a part of the conversation today. This was fantastic, and I hope that others in the audience got as much out of the conversation as I did. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, we're done. Drop the mic.
Just mic drop and they're getting out of here. So we have a couple minutes for some questions. If anyone would like, just raise your hand. I'll come to you with the microphone.
We can also cold call. We can just.
Well done. Very, very strong discussion. I wanted to share one of the discussion we had at a Africa and VC conference almost a year back in Dakar. It was, as always, a male majority of a group of fund managers, but a number of female. A lot of discussion on diversity and presence of female in investment world. The group agreed at the end of the weekends, I don't know if it was a factor of the drinking and the having fun, but that looking in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, that we have no choice but to aim at least a 50-50. Not like getting to 10 or 15, which making that pledge means that from now on every fund manager has to 80% or 8-to-1 or 9-to-1 recruit female analysts, etc., to build a pipeline for having the partners in the firm so that we have really a female lens in investment. Do you believe this is achievable? Do you see some progress since that pledge was made? I know some of the firms that were present are definitely working hard at it, but what are you seeing? And is that the right approach?
Amal, can I turn to you to pick that up? Yeah.
I think it's a question very much that starts with how asset allocators put the metrics for investing in funds, and that has, definitely there's been a lot of movement, like we talked earlier, around ESG and also diversity metrics. They definitely look at women representation as partners, but I think more it will be done to measure retention as well. Like when do women fall off the track to make partner, right? Like, we see a lot of women that, actually think, they just don't lean in, right? They don't continue post-principal because they don't think they will make partner at the end and they have other commitments in life. And I think, there's more diligence to be done, and I think LPs are turning towards that of what are the retention metrics. It actually looks worse if you just get a partner at the top to fit that box and, become eligible for the fundraising. And so there's more, because once you start thinking about retention, it changes the culture of the firms, the behavior, like how are you investing in the talent that are becoming more and more entitled and asking for more today, to really build a firm that is more equitable and truly living by those values. So I think that the first steps have been taken, but there's definitely more to be done and a direction towards that.
Fantastic. Question from the back.
Thank you. Shahab from Camel Ventures. So I think most importantly is education, what you mentioned, because I see a very big role for the regulators in the women landscape. So to give an example, Egypt, the Financial Regulatory Authority, the Central Bank, and so on, now is required to have like 25% representation of the board to be from women, which was very, very important because it increased the diversity across the board, the different sites. But at the same time, there is a big problem in finding qualified women for these boards. So education has to come in parallel with it, because I think there are like 20 women who are rotating across all boards in Egypt. So this also needs to change. So both sides, I think regulators are also very important, parallel to LPs, DPIs, and so on, because they can push much more this agenda. Thank you.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I can speak to that, because also I get a lot of those calls from people who have to tick that box and are saying, who do you know? Can you recommend any friends? Yeah, I do. I get a lot of those, and many of them are doing it really. The intention is just to tick the box, but since they're finding someone anyway, it would be great if she would also qualify. And then you name all these people, and they're like, oh, I didn't think of her, I didn't think of her. So two things are happening here. First of all, on that regulation, it was great, but then from an implementation perspective, apparently you can sign yourself up to be listed kind of on that list that all these companies can choose from. Try and navigate that site. It's an impossibility. So regulation, yes, but then the follow-through from an implementation perspective. So that's one aspect with regards to some of these things. So I'm so with you, like, you know, top down from a policy perspective, a lot of this makes sense, but then from an implementation perspective, no. And then all these other people that would really qualify that didn't know about it. So once again, part of the implementation, by the way, is for, you know, if all these women know, listen, you know, all these companies need you to, you know, there are all these opportunities for you to serve on the board. So many would be signing up for that. And then you also have to make it possible to sign up on that registry. But then the other thing is, and once again, I think this is a function of generations or cohorts, however you want to put it, but it, you know, there was never a question around female ability or intelligence. Like since Marie Curie, nobody's questioning if women can, you know, but it's more about, once again, structurally, the way society's set up. If you look even in our space at the junior level, you'll find a lot more female representation, but less so at the senior levels. Why? People will fall through, one, because of what Emil was saying, and then the other thing, of course, is because of, you know, kind of that, the difficult position of having to balance career and, you know, let's say, perceived duty to the home. And of course, culture is a factor, and we do not operate in a vacuum of it, right? And this is in many parts of the world. It's not just in MENA or Africa. So that happens a lot. So some of these that may have fallen also really qualify, but how do you bring them back in? So I agree with you, like I think the policy is great, and I really think it's so commendable what's happening here. A really big part of the progress. Implementation, on the other hand, is what we just have to follow through on that.
Sorry, because I feel passionate about this one, so I quickly respond. Because I do like that regulation a lot. I think it's done a lot so far. And I know quotas are frowned upon in the US, and there are specifically no quotas for women on boards in the US for these reasons. But I do believe in having women in the room actually, and it's on us to bring in more, right? Like if they call you and say, you know, I already say I'm more in enough board, but here are 5 other people you should call. But what I do disagree with is the education part, because it's one of the things where, I know your spirit on education is different, but how it got played out is basically they say, oh, we don't have a pipeline, and the same goes for female founders, but they'll say we don't have enough of a pipeline of women who are qualified to be on the board. Okay, let's give them a course on how to be on a board. And I say, how many men have taken a course on how to be on a board? Show me your board and tell me the qualifications of the men on your board, and then what do you expect of it? Because they'll have a whole list of like 15 things that this woman should have in order to be on a board. And you look at the existing board members, and they don't even fit 3 of them. So the education piece goes both ways.
Just a quick one on that. Clearly, we're all very passionate about this. Intentionality, I think, really counts here. So it is great that there are in Egypt, but also in a couple of other markets now, these intentional policies by the regulators, and this is really important. And I believe in, some other markets we have seen how that has shaped the landscape. In Germany, for instance, we've had these quotas for a long time. You know this, and that's really shaped a lot of the landscape quite significantly. But I think when it comes to but there's just not enough women who qualify, and I think it's a bunch of because there are actually a number of platform, Boardroom Africa, African Women on Boards, all sorts of other networks where there are several hundreds of professional women who are all qualified or in fact overqualified to sit on a number of different boards where you don't necessarily need to continue to cycle. So we've also got to be intentional with regards to, how do we find women that we want to place on boards, right? Because if we continue, while I think it's great when we call somebody up and say, hey, do you have a referral? We always keep it within that, sort of same circle of people, and that's why it's always the same 20 names that circulate. It's like that in almost in every market. So we have to be more intentional to say, where are the senior women? Because guess what? They're out there, they're qualified, and they're more than happy to serve on boards.
Absolutely. So there was clearly a lot of passion around that question. We'll close it out here. I'm glad it was interjected because we didn't talk about the role of government, right? We didn't talk about the role of regulation. That's a whole conversation that we should have maybe like next year. But just for the final word, I could give it, but I want to turn to Nadia. I'll allow you to give the final word.
There you go.
No, I think we've had a very interesting conversation today, and we had a very interesting conversation offline. I think we're all aligned that it really comes down to intentionality and education on both things. Like the younger generation needs to be there, stronger, more confident in themselves, willing to take opportunities, willing to put themselves out there, not taking it personally. And on the top level, like top-down kind of way, businesses need to be more focused and more like aware and conscious about the decisions they're making and make this a priority. And I think at the point when these two meet, this is when it will finally not be a problem anymore.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Give them a very, very, very big round of applause. What a great panel.